other investment do you expect, foresee, recommend in AI?
So look, I think that we've seen massive private sector investment. The question is, what's the right framework for potential regulation of the risks associated with this? And I think there are real risks. I think a basic principle to start with is let's treat AI with the same lens that we would treat any other form of potential technological risk to human beings. One of the things that we're probably not doing enough of is thinking about what is the liability borne by companies that develop algorithms or protocols that have unintended consequences. You can't dump in somebody else's river as a chemicals company. Shouldn't be any different if you're developing a new kind of product. But that's different from saying that, you know what, we're going to adopt constraints that other countries aren't adopting, like China or other countries, that are going to ultimately put us at our own competitive disadvantage. So I think those are some basic principles, is we don't want to adopt constraints that make us any less competitive than another country. At the same time, how do we achieve a competitive economy? A general piece of caution I would offer is anytime you see members of a regulated industry, especially the larger incumbents in that regulated industry, advocating for a form of regulation, that is usually a basis for an alarm bell going off for why that larger incumbent is advocating for that form of added regulation. We want to...
I think he's making a great point right there. He wants America to stay competitive in the global marketplace against countries who have less regulation, such as China. So that's why deregulating is actually a very good priority to have for the next government.
Ensure that we have continued competition as well. And I do think that one of the best ways of safeguarding against the risks of AI is actually the best check on the risk of any one form of AI is the existence of competitors that are taking a different approach and can offer a market competitive check on what one form of AI, if it was truly a monopolist developing it, would actually represent to a country. So I think it's time-tested principles of competition, of ensuring that manufacturers internalize the risks of their economic activity. It's old school solutions, but applied to new age challenges and problems. And that's how I think about the future of AI.
What are the...
Yeah, I think competition is a great thing. It's a great thing for the global marketplace, for the free market, and competition is actually very beneficial for the customers. If the market is very competitive, if two companies are competing against each other, then in the end, the product will get better and the consumer will be happy.
Areas do you expect surprises to the upside? That is, other places where you would advise, foresee more investment?
Well, I don't, surprises to the upside, meaning seeing more investment or less investment. Yeah, I don't know exactly how to think about that at that general level.
Spend more on.
Yeah. I want to spend more on what actually advances the goals of the federal government. What should the federal government actually do well? The federal government should do, I think, a couple of things well. One is to provide security to the United States of America. It's the top job of the federal government. One of the great jobs of government more broadly is to protect and preserve the rights, including property rights and the constitutional rights of individuals. Those are the two things our federal government should be doing. And I think it's not doing as good of a job as it possibly could today, in part because it's spending money on a wide range of other things, generally through the regulatory state and the growing entitlement state, that were outside the purview of what our founders envisioned for the federal government. The beauty of living in America, in our country, which was a creedal nation founded on a set of ideals.
I agree, totally agree with him. What he's saying, that the first job of the government is to protect its citizens, and it's totally right when he said he should spend enough money for security and protection.
Is that we don't have to make up those ideals every generation. We can just stick to the original time-tested version that set our country into motion the first time around. Follow the Constitution. We have a Constitution with 3 branches of government, not 4. The legislative branch makes the laws, the executive branch enforces the laws, the judicial branch interprets the laws. It's actually something, it's a brilliant idea with separation of powers. We don't follow that today, and most binding edicts, most government decisions are made by people who fall in none of those 3 branches of government. I think if we fix that, if we mostly get rid of this 4th unelected branch of government, the administrative state, I think our Constitution actually works pretty well in getting us how far we've gotten. For most of our history, we didn't have an administrative state. We had a federal government that was tiny by comparison to the one we have today. We have one that actually was pretty consistent with the one that our founders envisioned. And we did pretty darn well. We got pretty far with a federal government of a size that would have made our founders proud. A big part of this is a lot of the questions that are taken on by the federal government also belong to the states.
He's actually gonna do a great job, I think. I think Vivek Ramaswamy, as a new Donald Trump advisor, together with Elon Musk in the DOGE, in the Department of Government Efficiency, is gonna do a great job for America, for the average American, for the American people, and its goal to reduce the size of the government, to make the government actually more efficient. Is gonna do great things. I think he has some amazing ideas for the future of the country, and we will see them unfold. Hopefully, it will not face so much resistance in Congress, so that he can apply the ideas that he come up with to make everything run smoothly. We will see what happens, and we will cover it all on this channel.
That's really what federalism itself was about. So think about the Department of Education, for example, in this category. That doesn't mean that public education isn't important for the future of the country to say we want to shut down the Department of Education. But what it does mean is that that is a function that is reserved to the states in exactly the way our framers envisioned in the 10th Amendment, which said that which is not explicitly reserved to the federal government in the Constitution is reserved respectively to the states and to the people. So I think those are two principles of restoring federalism, restoring the separation of powers, shut down the unelected fourth branch of government that gets in the way. And I do think that that's a blueprint that's not original. And I'm glad it's not original, because what we believe in this country and what's gotten us to where we are, to be the greatest nation, I believe, known to the history of mankind, is following the greatest operating manual for a nation known to the history of mankind, and that's the U.S. Constitution.
All politics is local. We're in Washington, D.C. You talked about mostly getting rid of the administrative state. The federal government, the administrative, the executive branch, it sounds like will be notably smaller.
I think if we get our job done, absolutely. I mean, I think that this is a government where if you ask George Washington and Alexander Hamilton even, and John Jay and Thomas Jefferson, is this federal government recognizable to the republic they set into motion? I think they would tell you this is unrecognizable, that it's a technocracy disguised as a democracy. And I think if we restore a federal government to a size that would make our founders proud, then yes, I believe that our best days as a country are still going to be ahead of us.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. That makes total sense. That you want to stick with what was working in the past and apply it for the future. I think it's great to innovate. I think it's great to come up with some new ideas to try and make things better. But when you see that something is wrong and that something is actually getting bloated, then you should definitely try to change something. And I think he's going to be able to do that, hopefully. Hopefully, we will not face so much resistance, because the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, is actually only an advisory committee. It's not an executive committee, so it cannot take action on the idea you come up with. It can only give advice, so hopefully the advice will get followed.
If we fail to do it, then I can't make you that promise. But I think that if we restore a federal government back to size that would make the signers of the Declaration of Independence and the framers of the Constitutional Convention proud, then I am rock solid confident that America's best days still lie ahead.
Now we're looking forward to bringing you into the conversation.
Great. Thanks, Vivek, and thanks, Mike. Going to turn it over to our Executive Director, Anya Manuel, for the question, please.
Thank you so much for coming. Great presentation. Thank you. I'm 100% with you on the low-hanging fruit. I spend a lot of time working with the DOD. I'm glad they're not immune from reform for DOGE. I just want to get in a little more detail at your point on the fourth unelected estate. Under President Nixon, about 1.1% of the U.S. population worked for the federal government. Now it's about 0.6%. So it's steadily gone down as a percentage of the U.S. population. And about 70% of those federal government employees work in what we would consider the national security agencies. So most of those are at DOD, Intel, et cetera, et cetera. How low do you want to go, and where are you going to cut?
So a couple of things. First is the idea of reducing the federal employee headcount is not really about saving cost. I think that that's either been a misunderstanding or mischaracterization of the objective. Actually, it's a very small portion of the total federal costs that are the headcount expenses to individual employees. I think that part of what you have is an overgrown federal government that is doing things that were never supposed to be done by the federal government in the first place. You look at the number of times in the last 2 years alone, or 2 to 3 years, that the action of a federal agency has been struck down by the US Supreme Court.
I think he's putting out a great misconception right there that people think are going to lose their job because they want to save money, but it's not actually the plan. His plan is not to remove employees in the government or government agent because he wants to save money, because actually the salaries in the government are only a small portion on the budget that is spent. The government decides where it spends trillions of dollars of the American taxes. Every taxpayer contributes a ton of money, and all of this money doesn't go all in salaries. Only the salaries are a very small portion. So actually, to make the government more efficient, you should try to define what the government should do and prioritize on what it should do in the future. And then people that are not in these objectives, then they should reorient themselves, basically try to do another job, accept another mission within the government, and try and make everything run better and more efficient.
You look at Loper Bright, you look at West Virginia versus EPA, you look at SEC versus JARCASI, countless cases just in the last several years where the federal government is doing things that you otherwise should not have done as a federal agency. It's illegal, according to the Supreme Court, unconstitutional under the laws and constitution of this country. Part of the problem is when you have a lot of people coming to work who shouldn't have had that job, they earnestly find good things to do, or what they believe are good things to do. Turns out we've already been put on notice that violate the law. And so I think part of the project of thinning out the federal bureaucracy, that's less about the headcount expenses, and it's more about actually respecting the rules of the road in the constitutional republic. Now, one way to do this is in a logical manner. What is the set of regulations that fall outside the scope of what the Constitution authorizes using those Supreme Court standards? If that's 10 or 20 or 30% fewer regulations, maybe it's more than that. Well, the industrial logic would say if the federal government is doing less, if the regulatory state at least is doing less, well, then you need less headcount to be able to carry that out. And I want to emphasize the individual federal employees are mostly not bad people, actually, because most human beings are not bad people. To the contrary, most people who are federal employees are doing what they do because they believe they're serving their country, and I respect that. And I think most of those federal employees, all of them, deserve to be treated with respect and dignity, no matter what changes are made. But I actually think it will happen to improve the productivity of the United States and our economic pie as a whole, because I don't believe that the highest and best use of any of those talented people is what they're doing in the federal government today, much of which even the Supreme Court tells us is outside of what's lawful in the federal government. And the way you improve the productivity of a country is the more you're actually tying what somebody's doing to a higher productivity activity, that increases the productivity in the economic whole and the economic pie of the nation as a whole. And so I think that this is going to be a positive development both for the economy as a whole, both for compliance with what our Constitution actually says is permissible to be done or not by the federal bureaucracy. But I'm hopeful it's going to be even good for many of the individuals who may make a transition from government service back to the private sector in a manner that respects them, in a manner that, because this wasn't really about wringing the biggest source of cost saving anyway, gives us a lot of latitude to be able to treat those workers and their families in a respectful way, in a way that doesn't leave them in a lurch, that might even be, by private sector standards, generous in training.
I think he's got some definitely great ideas right there. People should actually do a job that is actually better for the country. And if they find out that the job that they're doing is not actually useful, they should try and do something else, basically. That's what I believe, and that's what I think he's gonna be able to do, hopefully. He's gonna face some backlash. I think so. He's gonna face some resistance, a lot of resistance from within the government, within the Congress, within the lawmakers, because people are adverse to change in general. People don't want to change. They want to go on with the flow, go on with the routine, be comfortable with what they are doing and keep doing what they are doing. And we don't like change as a species in general. So he's gonna face some difficulty trying to make the changes that he wants to do, but ultimately it's for the greater good It's for the greater good of the American people. It's for the greater good of the country. And hopefully we will see that implemented in the near future, in the coming years. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video with me today, guys. Thanks for staying with me to the end. I really appreciate it. Click right there to watch the next video, and I will see you there. Bye bye for now.